Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and welcome to this little piece of Battlefleet Gothic history. I had a lot of requests after the last video that I made for one, a follow-up to see what the hell is going on, and two, a bit of an explanation of why we are in the situation that we are. So first, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to make the point that everything is fine with the fleet list. Everything is legal with the fleet list. We got the information and the clarification that we needed from people with the authority to actually say what is legal and what is not. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, this kind of goes into a far deeper question about Battlefleet Gothic as a whole and the nature of the rules that we're using. Now, a lot of people will talk about what makes the remastered rules better on a balance or a systematic issue than the fan-made rules, but there's actually one crucial element of the rules that of remastered that makes them superior and official that none of the other rule sets actually have. And that is authenticity. They also have a direct chain of custody, so to speak, all the way back to Anti Chambers, who is the gentleman who created the very rules of the game. Now, what is this chain of custody? What is this authority that they have? Well, realize that in any game system that is any form of official nature in a competitive sense, any tabletop game ultimately has somebody who has the custodianship of the rules. Basically, the gentleman with the very most final say of what is or is not. This could be a person, this could be a group of people, this could be any number of things. But really in the end, what it is the authority and the backbone of the rules themselves that makes them official, and anything somebody creates in their backyard unofficial. It's also the reason why Battlefleet Gothic is one of the hardest things in the world to have a new rule set for. It's one of the reasons why we don't share the same problems like Epic Armageddon, where they have multiple forks of official quote unquote rules, and why there should never really be a tournament out there that tries to claim any form of authority with the community unless it is using the remastered rules. You cannot have a Horus Heresy, you cannot have a XR tournament and pretend that you have any kind of standing broadly in the community, because ultimately you're just playing with your fan-made rules, popular as they may be. Now, what is this authority? What is this almost arrogance that I have about the remastered rules? What is this grandiose element, this livery of importance? And that would be the element of the High Admiralty. Now, please forgive me if I mix up High Lord or High Admiralty. I am a father of a 1-year-old child. My brain is terminally underslept, and they're synonymous terms in many cases. And because 40K uses both terms, it's going to be something that I'm going to slip up with a lot. Ultimately, they mean the same thing. The High Admiralty are three gentlemen that have been granted the authority of custodianship of the rules. These three individuals have the power to change Battlefleet Gothic and their rule and any of its rules in any element. If we find something that has to be changed, it must be presented to the High Admiralty for any kind of change. And people are going to say, okay, well, that sounds very cumbersome. That also sounds very hard to get anything changed. And that is correct. It is extraordinarily difficult to get anything changed. It took me 3 months of yelling to get something that we made a terrible mistake on back in 2010 fixed. The Grey Knights fleet was completely unplayable. And thankfully, it didn't take that long by comparison to get it fixed and ready for the remastered fleet book. But the gentleman in question are right there in the Battlefleet Gothic remastered books. If you go down to the 2010 compendium, references the 2010 compendium. Gentlemen who are responsible for it is Bob Henderson, Ray Bell, and Nate Montez. And these three gentlemen are the current custodians of Battlefleet Gothic as a whole. Now, there is something important to point out. There is one name that is missing from that list, and that's Roy M. Crews, or Horizon. The gentleman who is responsible for Warp Rift, who is who is considered by the High Admiralty to be a member of the High Admiralty, very likely put there because he's been so instrumental in keeping Battlefleet Gothic as a community online alive. And we thank him deeply for all the things that he does, even if he decided to go and make the move, shoot rules, and for that I will never forgive him. However, these four gentlemen, or as Ray would like to prefer it, the 3+1, because he underplays his authority. He very rarely uses it because he considers Bob, Ray, and Nate to be far more of a higher status than him, which could be handy because it is better for these three gentlemen to do this. And these three gentlemen were also responsible for a lot of the playtesting of Battlefleet Gothic, and they've done an enormous amount of good for the community a long time ago. Without them, the 2010 FAQ would have never happened. Now, the importance of them cannot be understated because this custodianship was granted to them by no one other than Andy Chambers himself, because Andy Chambers effectively washed his hands with Battlefleet Gothic when he left GW. So these three gentlemen, now in complete control of it, did what was probably the wisest thing that any custodian of any set of rules for any kind of game with even a moniker of competition is to basically go into the woodwork and never be heard from again. By not changing the rules of Battlefleet Gothic, they actually gave people the time to learn the rules for Battlefleet Gothic and not fall into the same problem that Warhammer 40k has fallen into, which is you have a new edition every year and the Space Marines get everyone else's toys. But the passage of time is cruel, and the interest of people can wane, ultimately. And one of the gentlemen of the High Lords, I won't say which one, never responds to any questions anymore. It appears that he has, like Andy, simply washed his hands with Battlefleet Gothic and has gone off to live his life, which is entirely his prerogative. But it does mean that we're kind of down to 2+1 High Lords. No one has stepped up or has been appointed to replace him, and that's really a decision that only the High Admiralty could really make, to replace somebody as a custodian. Now, while it is great that our rules remain relatively static, we do occasionally run into problems like the Grey Knight issue, like the realization that it's the very real realization that a number of ships in 2010 were never actually reviewed. We're able still to communicate with enough of them to get these problems ameliorated relatively quickly. Admittedly, some things could happen faster, and it would be nice if things happened faster, but one of the hallmarks of Battlefleet Gothic is that things travel slowly in space, and the rules changes also happen very slowly as well. So what are the positives and the negatives of this? Well, as I've said, any change that happens comes with a great deal of deliberation, and it ultimately is the choice of a number of people that are rather detached. They're not very particularly, in the know. They're not very swayed by popular opinion, and they're capable of, at least ideally, having a more philosophical view of a lot of things. The downside is that as time goes on, they become too detached, or they detach entirely from the greater community and the needs of the community, because there have been people calling for a new FAQ for quite some time to shore up some issues that, quite frankly, and I shudder to admit this, other fan-made rule sets have done better. There are absolutely improvements that things like XR have done to the main rules that are simply more streamlined, more efficient, and don't hurt the game, so long as you don't go into their actual fleets. So a lot of people are going, well, why aren't these things being, adopted? Why can't we fix these problems? And that's a very good question. And a lot of people would really like the answer. And the answer is we have to find a way to communicate with a number of people who are willing to allow a new FAQ to happen. And broadly speaking, the answer's been no. So that is both a blessing and a curse. We do have a future problem, which is, like I said, the passage of time is cruel. Some people are actually wondering if one of the High Admirals has actually passed away, and what happens if the High Admirals all do pass away. To whom does that custodianship go? It's a good question, because it shouldn't just go away. The worst thing that could happen with Battlefleet Gothic, and I have, as a content creator and as a rule maker, and I make a lot of rules for this game. I think I am among the most prolific rules creators for BFG than I don't know anyone who's made more than I have. Horizon is probably the closest, or if not, he's the only one that has actually made more new rules for this game than myself. The I think I kind of just lost my train of thought, but I'm sorry. A lot of people have come to me and asked me, why haven't I created my own rule set for Battlefleet Gothic that fixes these problems? And there's two important reasons for that. Number one, the changes that I would make would be so minor that no one would even notice that I had made them. We're talking 45 centimeter weapons batteries on a Solaris, and that's it. Maybe minor changes to how bombers and turret suppression works. And after that, I would just kind of sit there and walk away going, that's good. I'm happy with that. I'm happy to keep all of my fan-made fleets in the fan-made domain because they're not official. We don't even, I think that we don't have any problems right now with the modern 40K universe, even with very minor exceptions. There's a couple of small elephants in the room, like the Necron dynasties and the Votan, but those are pretty small elephants that we don't really have to pay too much attention to, or we can consign to the fan sphere. This is why I created the Book of the Void project, so it's at least a good-looking, lore-filled environment to make these things that allow us to have a little more fun than to try to toe the purely loreful line. Because I've always felt that Battlefleet Gothic at 40K in general is a satire. And there should be an element of twisted British humor involved. Like, if any of you have the opportunity to go and read the narrative that I'm writing for Book of the Void 3, I'm not joking when I say that it's a pyramid scheme going to war with a toll booth. There's a lot more involved than that, but I truly do believe in the satirical, dry British humor element that has always gone through all of 40K that only relatively recently has started to be crushed out of existence. I think that orcs should be over the top and silly. I don't think that they should be super ultra mega hyper serious. I think the shock attack gun is the funniest thing the orcs have ever made. The fact that we lost the shock attack gun for like 3 or 4 editions was a terrible shame, and it's great that we get it back now. But even the Space Marines are a joke. Every one of the armies is a joke, and it's a play on all of contemporary science fiction. And I love that element, and that may not translate well into official works. So we have to be extraordinarily careful. Now, what would it take to actually force let's say something happens in 2026 and forces us to actually adjust the rules. Now, there are a couple of things that would happen. Number one, Games Workshop, who ultimately has the authority over the rules of Battlefleet Gothic more so than anyone else, can come in and say, we are going to change the rules. There's not a lot we can do when it comes to what is authorized and official and what is not. Games Workshop owns Battlefleet Gothic. There's no question about that. Now, whether or not the community accepts those rules and accepts their authority is another question, and whether or not the High Admiralty is, basically the High Admiralty would have to come out and say, we will continue to be the custodians of Battlefleet Gothic. Well, those that remain. If they come out and say, no, we're throwing entirely behind the new rule set, the old rule set is now defunct and is considered fan only, it will cause a great deal of harm, but it would also free the community itself to turn around and edit it the way they may want to edit it. And that unfortunately would have a very negative effect on the community, however, unless Games Workshop doesn't actually change anything and does that thing that they never do, which is listen to the fans, which we all know they won't do. The other thing that could potentially happen is a significant enough issue and enough pressure is placed on the High Admiralty to actually kind of hunker down and actually be willing to make and go through the process of a 2026 FAQ. Now, it would not be a particularly large one. It would mostly be a matter of balancing omissions and maybe some remissions. Some ships may be added, but mostly it's a matter of fixing ships that are there and removing ships that don't belong there. It would be a much smaller FAQ than the 2010 compendium, and it would be a minor tweaks. There would be very few additions ultimately to BFG unless we finally get enough information for the Votan to necessitate us creating a full fleet. I think the Votan is day by day, edition by edition, the Votan are becoming a bigger and bigger elephant, if that makes any sense. The elephant is growing as more and more lore is trickled in to the broader 40K sphere, and eventually we won't have much of a choice but to make an official fleet for them, because the Demiurge, while they are Votan, they are not the Votan battle fleets. The Demiurge are basically a mercantile offshoot. They're the equivalent of rogue traders and are not representative of an actual battle fleet. So that will probably be, I think, if we get enough information. Like, weirdly enough, if somehow Fantasy Flight Games gets the license again to make tabletop rogue trader games, and they make just a full spread of rules for the Votan fleet as a way to debut them into the lore, then that would be something that we would probably have to consider worth a 2026 FAQ to make rules that are balanced, interesting, and official, because they are a faction, and they are a major enough faction that deserves a proper battle fleet. Ships aren't a problem. We can, have people. We have 3D designers going left and right, making their own versions of Votan ships already. It's too late. Thank you, by the way, William. You know who you are, but it hasn't been enough for the Necrons to have their lore renovated. The dynasties were not enough for us to turn around and say, do we need to change anything? Because ultimately, there's not a lot that actually needs to be changed. There is room for more Necron ships, but nothing that doesn't really fall into the domain of the fan-made sphere. Again, it's still an elephant in the room, but it's a smaller elephant. It's a pygmy elephant, if you want to put it that way. If the 2026 FAQ happens, it would be something that would have to be addressed, but it is not enough to actually trigger the addressing of their absence. Other things like Dark Eldar missing a lot of their content. They have battleships, they have larger ships. If they're in the lore, just look up things that Duke Sliskus has. He has 11 battleships that he just goes through because he's like wearing a different suit of clothes. There are definitely more ships, Craft World Eldar ships out there. There's an awful lot that still needs to be added, quote unquote, to Battlefleet Gothic to really bring it up to date with current lore. I mean, we could, if we really wanted to, incorporate things like Primaris Marines. Would the Primaris Marines have a more advanced, more up-to-date strike cruiser? That's a great question. The Indomitus Crusade was a massive fleet with a bunch of ship classes that we've never heard of. And there's a lot of room for Imperial Navy ship classes. There's a lot of room for that. So there's BFG right now is been in a almost an over a decade holding pattern. And the real question is, when does the pressure from the changes in 40K finally tip the balance and force us to actually do something? Well, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, unfortunately. I have been low-key drumming up the idea of a new FAQ to address some of these problems, but I have to agree with the naysayers. There just isn't enough background. There's not enough lore. We don't know enough about the Votan fleets. We have some very minor, very obscure, and very unusual lore about their capacities. We know they exist. We know their battle fleets are powerful and not to be messed with. They definitely deserve to be on this scale. But I don't know, we don't have a picture. We don't know what they look like. A picture of a Votan ship, a full-sized Votan ship, has never actually been shown. We have obscure an obscure almost front on profile, and that's it. We have a couple of class named ships out there. We do. I think one of them's called the Nebula, the Prospector. A lot of things that you would expect out of Rock and Stone with Stone and Rock, but without more information about the effectiveness of their weapons, the kinds of tactics that they use on a broader combat scale, we just don't have the info. And without the info, we can't progress. And this can be resolved if GW would just pay attention to their subfleets, subfactions, and not give Space Marines literally everything all the time. So the other way that we could potentially at least get a small FAQ going is if you get enough people to go and tell Horizon, if you want, you can, he does comment down here. So if we ever see Ray make a comment about it, pressure him. Say, hey, we probably need to do a 2026 FAQ. We have to spend some time and, continue to fill in the holes. Because there's a couple of things that really do deserve to be changed. I would say the Solaris does needs a 45 centimeter weapons battery to make it worth taking ever. I think that the Dominion and the Jovian need to be removed from Battlefleet Baka. Other very, very minor changes. And yeah, we probably should, to Excalibur's credit, yeah, that's right, I'm giving Excalibur credit, incorporate his bomber and turret suppression rules. They're great. They're very streamlined. They're much easier to deal with, and they speed up the game. So ultimately, though, I hope that helps explain why we call the official rules, and the level of authority that goes behind that. Because we do have that chain of custody going all the way back to Andy Chambers, Gav Thorpe, Jervis Johnson, Matt Keefe, Andy Hall, all the guys in game design and development. Pete Haynes, Tim Adcock, Warwick Kinrad, all of these people, okay, are responsible. And Bob Henderson, Ray Bell, and Nate were there helping. And they are now in control. One of them doesn't talk. There is the +1 who doesn't like to flex his authority that much, and I respect him for that. But, there will be a time where we will have to act. When that is, I can't tell you. GW sometimes moves very fast. Sometimes they move very slow. Sometimes the community will come down overwhelmingly with enough of a push to actually get things changed. Sometimes they just say no. Ultimately, I've always been of the opinion that one should actually try to fix things, and nothing ventured, nothing gained. So if you feel that you have something that needs to be fixed and really needs to be fixed, let's talk about it down below in the comments. Why does it need to be fixed? What is so important about it in the rules? And remember, If it has to do solely with the personal opinion of how cool a fleet should be based upon what you want, it's probably not going to be added. We need things that are more important about how useful, how effective, why should I take this ship, why should the ship be there, etc. These are far grander questions. So really think about the things you feel need to be changed. All right. Let's all start a discussion down below. I can't wait to see your comments on this, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next video.